Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teal. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teal, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Welcome, everyone, to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. I'm glad you could join us today. It's November, and November is dubbed National Caregiving Month, where we celebrate and honor caregivers, family caregivers, unpaid family caregivers who care for someone that can't care for themselves out of the goodness of their heart, not getting paid for it. There are so many people that are unpaid family caregivers because there are so many people that need help, especially people that have dementia, some sort of dementia like Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, frontotemporal degeneration, lots of people that need help because they can't do it on their own, and they need someone to help them with activities of daily living, which is bathing, dressing, toileting, eating. They need someone to perform executive functions for them, things like balancing a checkbook, making appointments, going to the doctor, driving a car, all of these things that as people have memory loss and lose their abilities to function, they need help. And unfortunately, according to the latest statistics from the National Alzheimer's Association, there is a lot of caregivers and a lot of people that are needing care. As a matter of fact, about every 63 seconds, someone in the United States is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. There are 5.8 million people living in the United States right now with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. And the statistic only gets worse because by the year 2050, we're expected to have 14 million people living in the United States that have some form of dementia and need care. So this means that not only every 63 seconds someone's diagnosed with dementia, but right after that there are more caregivers stepping up to the plate. And it's something that caregivers aren't expecting. It's something that they don't have any idea most of the time unless they were a caregiver when they were young for maybe a grandparent. But an adult child or a spouse, they're usually thrown into the situation. And it's very scary to say the least, and confusing and a lot going on. But we want to honor our caregivers and support them. This show does that by providing education for caregivers and their families on all things related to dementia and all things related to caregiving. But today, in the month of November, we want to celebrate and honor some caregivers. So we have a couple caregivers joining us today from their home, logging in, and I'm so excited that they're here to share their story with us. Patricia Dawson is a caregiver for her mother, and she is a fairly new caregiver, and I guess in the scheme of things, learning her way. And also joining us is David Hellman, and he's a caregiver for his wife, and he's been doing it a little bit longer, a number of years. So we have sort of both ends of the spectrum here, a fairly new caregiver and a seasoned one. So we're going to learn from both Patricia and David today about their journey, what they're learning, advice that they can give, and hopefully by going down this path with them, other caregivers can learn from that, because it really is helpful to hear someone's story and know that you're not alone, because your story might be similar. And although everyone's story is different and everyone's journey and down the caregiving path is different, there are a lot of similarities. And I would guess to say that most of the feelings that are exhibited and are confronted are also very, very similar. So welcome, Patricia and David, to the Caregiver Solution Info Show. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. We're honored to be here to support this good organization.
Well, glad that you're here and taking the time, because that's the thing that caregivers don't have a lot of, is time. And carving out an hour of your day, I know it probably feels like a lot more than an hour just to be on the show. So I really appreciate your time. So Patricia, I want to start with you first, because you're a newer caregiver, and I know that you're caring for your mother, and you had to bring her across halfway across the world, practically, from another country to your home in South Florida to take care of her. So how did you become a caregiver? How did that happen? What triggered that move?
Well, she was living overseas with my brother, and he noticed, some strange things that she used to do. Even though I used to call her very often, she spoke very well on the phone. I couldn't pick up anything really. But he just noticed some odd things that she was doing. For instance, with the kettle, she sometimes forgot that the electric kettle was plugged in for the electric, and she once put the electric kettle on the stove, the gas stove. Well, it caused a minute fire. So she tried to cover it up. She had that cognitive way of knowing she did something bad, but she was trying to cover it up. And it just went kind of downhill from there. She used to live over here in New York. She's from New York. She spent many years in New York. So being a daughter, I know my brother, he didn't have the capabilities to care for her with 100% with all the elements, and we all thought it would be best if she came and lived with me back in Florida. So a year and a half, I brought her home. It's been a year and a half. I can't believe it's been that long. I mean, this went like a blink of the eye. She came to live with me, and it's like every 6 months I see a change in her. And then, I needed support because I was here alone with my daughter. She was giving me, some support. I have a teenage daughter, 18 years, well, no, she's 19 now. So it was the three of us here, and we just, tried to cope with my mother, and, slowly but surely I got her services, I got her different various doctors, from a primary care physician to a neurologist, all those different types of doctors. So,
right.
To give you some
So Patricia, you brought her home to live with you, and you had some help, some support from your teenage daughter, and that was great. But I also understand that you work full time, right? And so now you're working from home full time. You have your mom, your daughter's helping, but your daughter, you told me, went away to college this fall. And now what happens at home with your support system being gone away at college? How did you cope with that, being home and trying to work and also trying to watch your mom and make sure she doesn't burn something else while you're, not watching her? How did you cope with that?
With great difficulty. I had to organize so many things in my head, safety things, because she's a social butterfly, and because of COVID too, She wanted to go out and do things, and I said, no, we can't go out to do what we could do. But I found a way. We sat outside on the porch. We sat outside. When it was cool in this hot weather, we found a way. We got to learn people walking, the postman. We know the postman very, you know, because they used to wave to us because we used to sit out and try and socialize that way. I got her into a routine actually, and she slowly, conformed. But yes, I had to work as well. So I just used to set her up, and if I had any meetings, I set her up around meals. I used to give her a plan around the meals, and then I took my meetings, and I just did it day by day. But it was tough, very tough.
Yeah, absolutely. It is tough when you have to figure it out on the fly, and get everything done and get yourself more organized, like you said, and you do really miss that support system that you had when your daughter was home. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, David is going to share with us how and when he became a caregiver for his wife. So we'll be right back. Stay tuned. Don't go away.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teal, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Thanks for joining us today. It's National Caregiver Month, and joining the show, we have two caregivers, Patricia and David, and they're going to tell their story about their caregiving journey. So thank you, Patricia, for telling us about how you became a caregiver for your mom. David, I want to go to you now because you shared a little bit of information with me that at some point when your wife was about 68 years old, you started noticing some things that weren't quite right with her. So can you describe what you noticed and what you did about it?
Well, I'm sorry for that noise. I hope you could hear me over that noise in the background. But anyway, my wife used to have a phenomenal memory, and she used to be an amazing reader of maps before we had GPS systems everywhere. And so the first time I noticed something really was unlike her was that she couldn't read a map as we were driving, and I counted on her to be my navigator, and she was looking for a shortcut for us and was in the wrong state. And I just took note of it. We went about our lives. We were still up north in the Berkshires. And then there were some incidents that happened. She had an experience that put her into a depression, and it seemed like after that her memory started to get. I used to just notice little things she would do. She was doing some work for me in my business, my law office, and was making some unusual kinds of mistakes, and so we stopped that. And then we moved down here a little over 5 years ago, and I thought everything was going to be just perfect, And but slowly I realized that too many things were not right. She didn't realize whenever we would drive around that any Publix that she saw, she would ask if that was our Publix. The same thing with the Walgreens when we would come down. I live in a condo. There are only 3 doors, and she never knew which door. And so after a while, I started to be concerned, and I mentioned it to the doctor, who, when he heard about what was going on, said, well, it's affecting her executive functioning. And so she had a very long battery of tests, and the diagnosis was mild cognitive impairment. And that was when once it started to show up, it really started to move fairly quickly. She was driving when we first came down here. It became clear that she shouldn't be driving. She couldn't find her way even with the GPS, and would ignore the GPS because she thought it was wrong and giving her the wrong directions. And then when she finally, I thought she was okay enough that I had a friend with her when I went away for a weekend to visit my son. And then when I came back, there was a window in which I couldn't reach her, and she went out after my friend left shopping, and then ended up, a long story, but she misplaced both cars. And I got a call from the police while I was in transit, and shortly thereafter she stopped driving, and then I began a whole program of doing the research and trying to get her to do aerobics and trying to get her into doing computer work and drawing and painting and things that would use her mind, and got her into several programs. But those were occasional programs, and then she was still living full-time at home, and the problem became that she couldn't cook anymore, and I had never cooked. So my friends would come over who knew us both for 40 years and say, you two are like living as if you're in starvation the way you go about your food. And I realized things really started to go down at that point. I ended up, through my friend, getting a cook to make meals for us. Then I found a daycare program for her. We discussed whether or not to have anyone come in to the home when I was not here, and she didn't want it, and I felt safe. She never did one of those leaving the stove burning or anything like that. And she liked basically staying in the house, in the apartment, and not going out, and really not even leaving the bed. And so eventually I got her into it. First it was 2 days a week, then it was 3 days a week, a day program. Eventually it was up to 5 days a week, and I was getting more and more help. I hired a driver after 3 years of doing that, because it was just, I never had any time for myself. When I took her to the program and then I had to come back and get her from the program, I never had a day. My time was never my own. When it was time to go to bed, I hadn't slept well in the last 4 years, 5 years.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, absolutely. Caregivers don't really sleep well. They have to keep one ear, one eye open, and you're always worrying about the next thing you have to do. Sleep is, a commodity that is hard to come by sometimes for caregivers. Patricia, when David was speaking about daycare and about taking his wife back and forth to daycare, you were shaking your head like you understood. Tell me tell me about your experience, because you had to get more help after your daughter went to college, so you started daycare too, didn't you?
Yes. From a good neighbor, she recommended me excellent daycare. So, I checked it out, and obviously you need criteria to get in, and I, went to the right doctors and got the right, diagnosis and criteria before I could, enter. But yes, I understand what you're saying, David. It takes up your time. Right now I have her 3 days a week. but only because I know I'll be exhausted. So I have a Tuesday through Thursday, because I know Mondays after the weekend, and just to physically just, get her dressed, get her organized. I know I would be exhausted because I'm driving her there, then picking her up. I got come back home and go to work, and then pick her up, and I do that 3 times a week, and I'm exhausted, really exhausted. So I can hear what you're saying. You had to hire a driver.
I
Maybe
had a
that's
driver,
something.
I had a cook, and then I eventually had the cook do the shopping as well as the cooking. And so, I mean, and I wasn't even working it like you. I'm very impressed that you're not only taking care of your mother, but you're also able to work a
Yeah,
job.
I'm working, and when I put her to bed, I go back. Thank God, I work from home, so I can fire up my computer, like a couple hours in the evenings when it's really downtown, when she's actually in bed, and so I can focus a little bit more, and get my job done. But yeah, it is very, very. You got to organize first. I know that, and it can be tiresome. And yes, again, you don't get sleep, because my mother, she's up early in the wee hours of the morning sometimes. She gets up crack of dawn, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 4 o'clock a.m. Sometimes I say, Mom, just get back to bed. But yes, it you, I don't think I've slept really for about a year, fully.
You
I find it very interesting that both of you started out with some adult daycare, which is a great place to start. And that's always recommended, try that because it gives you some reprieve, it gives you a respite, it gives them something to do and keeps them busy. But that's not the whole story. And now I hear you both saying it's a solution, but it's not the best solution because you're exhausted from the back and forth and the schlepping and the picking up and the planning. And I know, Patricia, your mom likes a certain kind of food, so you send her off with special food that she's used to from Jamaica because that's what she prefers. So you're also doing some extra cooking, to send her off. So it's hard. I mean, you hear in what you're saying, just because you get some help, it's still very hard. It's exhausting, and it doesn't end just because you get a little bit of help. David, did your wife like the adult day center? Did she seem to benefit from it?
In the beginning, yes, and she used to actually really like it. And she was, in a way, the star because she still had quite, and still does. She can still read amazingly. She can sort of use the phone, um, and and we started out, as I said, 2 days a week, then 3 days a week, and then 5 days a week. It's because she was enjoying it, and then she reached a point where the declines were not as obvious to me, at the moment, but I would drop her off, or I would get emails or texts or calls from her after an hour. I'm ready to go home, and it was pretty much a 9 to 5 kind of program. And the reason I put her into that program in the first place, I looked around a lot, was that they had a memory. They believed in innovative memory enhancement program. It was called. And so I was really looking for a support group, and I just happened to luck onto this daycare place not far from me. And when I was talking about the support group, they mentioned, we have this daycare program and we have this memory enhancement program. And I said, well, that's exactly what I'm looking for, because I still, although everyone would let me know that there was, or as much as they would, that I'm really knocking myself out and nothing is going to change for the better, but I didn't accept that. And
Yeah, it's
so
hard to accept changes when they come, and And, thank you for being vulnerable and saying that you didn't recognize those changes, because most times the caregivers are so involved with the care, they don't always recognize the decline and the changes as much as maybe other professionals do, like at the day center and maybe some of your friends. Patricia, you're new to the adult daycare environment because your mom just went there within the last couple months. You started taking her. Were you afraid of making that step? Did you have any fear or concerns about her being taken care of by strangers? Because obviously you didn't know the people, personally, and they were strangers, and you're giving your mom to them, 3 days a week. How did you feel about that? What did you think?
Oh, I was very scared. But I was exhausted too. So, I was and ahhing for months, and I came to the point that I was pure exhausted. Really, I was on the point of desperation. So I says, because it's COVID too, and I just said, let's just try. It was a risk, but I was up to my wits' end, really. And like I said, I got some good recommendations, which I took, and I haven't looked back. She enjoys it. She thoroughly enjoys the 3 days, and it's very interactive, and she just likes it. It's very stimulating for her, very stimulating, and she just loves it. And I love the people too, because they seem to be very caring, always have a smile, which is encouragement for me too, to see these wonderful caregivers, love their job and always smiling, and they seem to give individual care too. It's a specialized daycare, but they also give individual care, different activities to the individual person.
Well, that's
So
great. I'm
yeah.
glad she took to it, like a duck to water, because obviously it gave you some free time to do your work and a little bit of time, hopefully, for yourself. But that's usually, one of the first things that professionals recommend for caregivers who are burnt out and exhausted is check that out to see if that would be an option for you. So I'm glad that it worked out for both of you for a time. But we're going to take a break. We're going to give away a free book on the break. And when we come back, David and Patricia are going to tell us more about their caregiving journey and where they're at now. So we'll be right back, and get a piece of paper and pen to write down how you can get a free book. We'll be right back.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help, because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teal, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on CaregiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our national sponsor, Arden Courts Memory Care Communities. They are a leader in memory care because memory care is all they do. With 10 Arden Courts in Florida and 50 all across the United States, Arden Courts is there for you, for the caregiver, not only to help the resident through their everyday and have quality of life, but for the caregivers too. So they promote this show, they have seminars and support groups. And today, just because you're tuning in, listening, or watching online, they'd like to give you this book. It's called The 36-Hour Day. It's a wonderful resource. It's a book that you can read from cover to cover or chapter or pick and through whatever topic that might be interesting to you or relevant to you at the time. The book is free just for the asking. And in order to get it, all you have to do is send an email with your name, address, and telephone number and ask for the book that you saw on the Caregiver Solution Info Show. That email address is delray@arden-courts.com. You can see it on your screen, but it's delray@arden-courts.com. So send them an email, let them know you'd love to have the book. They'll get it and put it in the mail right to you, and you'll be really glad that you have this resource at your fingertips. So we are celebrating National Caregiver Month, and with us today are two caregivers, Patricia Dawson and also David Hellman, talking about their caregiving journey with Patricia's mom, with David's wife. And you know, I'm hearing you all, you know, and you're wonderful because you're so passionate and caring, and caregivers, you know, deserve all the gratitude and everything that we can do to support them, because it's definitely a hard job, probably one of the hardest jobs anybody ever has to do. So, David, you retired to Florida. You gave up your law practice and retired to Florida. So obviously, when your wife started having all these memory problems and doing all these things that you knew weren't right, I imagine you were thinking about your retirement plans sort of going up in smoke. What did you think when all this was happening?
Well, somebody said to me, man plans and God laughs. And that's pretty much the way I was experiencing it. I had thought that we had set our lives up so that we could retire comfortably. And we both worked. Paula worked till she was 70, and I did too. And you know, we put in our time, and I was looking forward to it being just an idyllic last quarter or so of my life. And it became somewhat of a nightmare, a living nightmare, to be honest. It was the most difficult thing I've ever. I can't even begin to explain it to anyone who hasn't gone through it themselves. And for those of you who have friends or kids or whomever who are far away, who are saying to you it's, no, it's not so bad, or it's this or it's that, or giving you all kinds of advice, the only thing I say is that unless you live it, you can't possibly understand what the sadness, the loneliness, the depression that it causes. So what happened with me was I knew I needed to get support for myself, and I ended up, by looking for a support group, finding the daycare program. And as the daycare program, it became clear. I tried many other things. We don't have the time to discuss all the myriad avenues that I tried before I finally realized that it was nothing's going to change what was the inevitable. And when I needed to realize that things were not working, she didn't want to go to daycare. She didn't want to have anyone come into the home either. And I realized that I had, and this is for people who are watching and haven't dealt with it yet, but a mistake I made in retrospect was I didn't discuss with my wife in advance, when she was still able to understand and think and express herself clearly, what she would like to do, how we would go about dealing with the problem, with the issue. And so it's something that I would urge people, if you see it happening, don't put it off. It's a tough discussion, but I wished I had had it. And so I was having to make these decisions all essentially by myself. And I finally, when it got to the point where it was clear that she was declining so much, and I went to the director of the daycare program and asked for some suggestions on full-time residence programs, and she gave me three. I went to several of them more than once. I brought my son up from DC. My dearest friend from Tampa went with me, and the one that I ended up feeling was the most appropriate for Paula happens to be Arden Courts, which is how I got connected to you and you to me. And frankly, I'm not being paid, folks, but I've been thrilled for this plug. But I have been as thrilled as I could be with the care that my wife gets at Arden Courts. This is the one in West Palm, and they've been wonderful to me as well. We have a support group that we've been doing now. I've been doing it for the 2 years now that Paul has been at Arden Courts, and twice a month we do it by Zoom. Before that, I was in a support group at the daycare program, and again, it's something I would recommend to any potential caregiver. This is not something that I think I myself is very strong, and I've handled a lot of responsibility, a lot of pressure in my life, and nothing even comes close to this kind of struggle. And so you need support, and I'm fortunate that I got support.
Well, you have to have support, and support comes in many different ways. So like Patricia told us, she was fearful and concerned when she signed her mom up to go to adult day center because she didn't know really what to expect, didn't know her mom was going to like it as much as she did. So she had some fear and concerns. Now you've taken the next step and actually have your wife in a memory care assisted living. What was going through your mind? What were your fears? What were your concerns? How did you feel? Because now, like you said, you're making all these decisions, and it's probably one of the hardest decisions a caregiver makes. But what was your fear about taking that next step, David?
Well, my biggest fear was that we hadn't discussed it in advance, and so I wasn't even sure how to implement it. You know, how do you say to someone who doesn't quite understand what's going on that you're going to go into this home and you're not going to be with me, and I'm not going to be with you? And I guess I count myself as extremely fortunate when I've heard so many of the stories, but Paula, just part of her personality, she easily adapted. I used somewhat of a white fib, which they talk about in the books. I read the 36 Hour. I read my two Elaines, and it talks about the telling some white lies. And so I said something that was close to the truth, which is I haven't been sleeping well for the last few years, and I need to go to get some help about sleep, and so I need to go away. And for the time being, you're going to and you'll go into this home. Like, we didn't even tell her that until, I say we because my dearest friend came to be with me to do this, because I wasn't sure I could handle it just by myself. And so we took my wife to Arden Courts, and they were terrific, and we brought her in, and she has her own room, and her name was already on the door, and we had prepared the room outside with pictures that I had chosen of her sister and her daughter and so forth, and of course myself and some of our closest friends, and so she could have that. And she's one. I just was really, really lucky, because a lot of people I hear, their spouse or their parent is always asking, when are you taking me home? When am I coming home? And Paula didn't do that. So
Yeah.
that was a big relief to know that she was comfortable there. I felt I met the people that were working with her. I would be there almost every day until COVID. Um, that's been very hard, of course, but
Yeah, that's a hard thing now with COVID, and it changes everything. COVID does. David, question. You made the decision. You said, this is what we're going to do, and your wife entered the memory care assisted living. With all the stress that caregiving gives, and the sleepless nights you've had, and all the worry that you've had, do you think that you had your wife go into a memory care? Do you think it was for her or for you?
good question. But the memory, you mean the home itself, as opposed to the daycare? I pondered that question over and over and over in my mind before I made the decision, and I have been in psychotherapy for the last. I originally started. It was Paula's therapist. Found her a therapist because I thought he may just be depressed, and maybe that was the answer. But it was after only about 1 or 2 sessions where the therapist called and said she doesn't remember enough to make the sessions worthwhile. Would you be interested in coming and helping? And I did. And then when Paula stopped, I felt like I really needed it. And so I looked at that issue over and over and over, and came to the conclusion that her sleeping all day long and lying in bed, and me not being comfortable to leave her, and her not wanting anyone in the home, and we have no relatives nearby, and it just seemed like the first thought that I needed a respite. And so Arden Courts, I believe, offered a respite program where you could bring your loved one there for a 30-day period or a 60-day period. And so I basically went into it with, let's see how she does, and no matter what, I need a break because I lost more than 10 pounds in weight. I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, I was sad the whole, all day long, and so it was an experiment to see. One thing I learned a very long time ago about decision making is you could always change your mind. Most things, you make a decision, you could always change your mind to change the decision. And so that's the way I went into it. If it worked out, great. If it didn't, I'd go to a plan B. I didn't have a plan B at the time, but I'd come up with a plan B. But this was the last resort, to be honest. I tried everything short of that. And ultimately, I think it's been the best thing for Paula, and it's been the best thing for me. I mean, honestly, I used to tell my son, I've never felt more lonely than when Paula was here with me, and yet she wasn't. So it's actually been easier in that way. It's hard to explain why, but it is. At least for me. I guess everyone's different, but that's the way it worked for me.
Yeah.
So,
well, I asked the question because sometimes, there's the matter of guilt comes up with caregivers, and, they are like, well, I feel guilty if I take time for myself, or I feel guilty if, they're not with me all the time. And, thank you for being so honest and sharing, because, doing for her and helping her actually helps you as the caregiver too, because the caregiver, the family caregiver, needs to keep up, their strength and their fortitude to be there still for your person. You're still the husband, but now you can be more the husband and not so much the caregiver because you have the professional caregivers, but you're still needed and you're still part of her life, and you're still a caregiver because you still have to make decisions for her that, things, medical decisions and other things that obviously she can't. So, you're being so honest that it was good for you and for her. And I think, people need to hear that and do, what's the best, but don't feel guilty if, you get a little bit of a break from it, because in essence, it's one of the best things that you can do. Let professionals get involved and help, and then take care of yourself. So that leads me back to Patricia. Patricia, you're not there yet with your mom, and who knows if you ever will be. But you're just started at the day center with her. I have a couple of questions for you, because she is with you all day, all night when she's not in the daycare center. What's the hardest part of caregiving for you? What do you struggle with the most when you're caring for your mom?
Just keeping her engaged, because if she's not engaged with something else, then she will be constantly talking to me, and all I can do is reinforce, because sometimes I can't get into her head what she's really trying to say. She can make her needs be known at this point, but sometimes she will wander off into a different direction, and all I can just do is, reinforce what she's trying to say, just to give her a lot of assurance. Basically, my mind is not rested. I can't have, 5 minutes to myself, because I'm constantly reassuring her, basically. And if she, if I'm another part of the house, she'll come find me, and it will start all over. She'll sometimes stuck in one particular item or one particular era, and it's constant. And basically, I'm constantly reassuring her 24/7. So that's the
hardest. Very frustrating.
Yeah, I don't seem to have any peace. My only outlet, I brought a bike. So when she's, kind of in between of the night, when I know that she's, settled in bed, I will just ride around the neighborhood, and that gives me, brings down, if I have any anxiety for that day, it just brings down that stress level.
Okay, at least you're doing it. You're fitting it in, and that's good. That's good. Get rid of some of that frustration. Even taking 15 minutes for yourself whenever you can grab them. David, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I wanted to. I don't know about urge, but I wanted to suggest to Patricia that that I couldn't do this without the support groups. I couldn't have done this without having a support group. And now the support groups are meeting by Zoom, so you don't even have to go, if I know because your time is so limited. But I would urge you for yourself that if you're not getting that kind of support, it's a very lonely world out there when you're the sole caregiver, and you don't know what you have feelings and emotions, and that other caregivers can understand and can relate to, and you could feel supported. We've lost her sound. I don't hear her. But anyway, I would urge you to check into that. I think you'll be really happy. Everyone in the group that I've been in said, we almost always say each time, I can't believe what I would do without this group.
Good advice. Very good advice. Thank you, David, for making that suggestion. We're going to take a last commercial break, but we'll have more as soon as we come back, so we'll be right back. Don't go away.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teal, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Celebrating National Caregiver Month, we have caregivers Patricia and David joining us on the show, talking about their journey caring for a loved one. Patricia shared her worst day taking care of her mom. Her mom's home, going to a daycare. So, David, I would go to you now. Your wife has been in a memory care assisted living for a little while now. Tell me what your best days are now. What do you... It's Thanksgiving's coming up, and it's time to be thankful. And I know it's a hard time for caregivers because, you know, the COVID is still here and for caregiving. But what's the best part of your day, or what can you be thankful for in your situation, David?
Hard question. Everything.
It is a hard question, and we only have another minute to talk about it, so it's going to have to be quick.
Well, so from where it had been, I guess the best thing is that I feel somewhat freer. I don't feel like because Paula is getting good care, I'm not spending all my waking hours as I used to do involved with her care. If I wasn't actively giving it, I was planning it. It was just always there. And now I've had some time to sort of find myself again and go through the grieving process. And I'm pretty close. I'm sort of at that acceptance phase right now, where I've made my peace with this is what it is. I appreciate the fact that she still recognizes me on the phone and tells me that she loves me. And I thought, well, if I could have asked for anything, I certainly wanted her to at least still know me and still love me. And she does.
That's something to be grateful for. Absolutely something to be grateful for. We can all find something to be grateful for. And to take care of herself. Patricia, sneaks off and takes a bike ride in the evening. What do you do for yourself, David, to take care of yourself?
Well, I do yoga twice a day for the last 45 years or so. I meditate every night. I play tennis now. I hurt my shoulder and I hadn't been able to play for a while, but when I'm feeling okay like I am, I play tennis as much as I can. I live by the beach. I go to the beach and take walks, and I'm starting to make some friends, which I had become reclusive, which was not my normal personality.
Well, I'm glad that you're doing that. Sounds like all wonderful things. You're taking care of yourself, Patricia. Same to you. Keep doing what you're doing, and join up with others like David, and you'll learn a lot. There's a lot to learn. And I want to thank you both for coming on the show today and participating and sharing your story. You guys are wonderful. Hooray for our caregivers. Keep up the good work. We'll support you. The information is out there. You just have to, tap into it. So have a good evening. Have a blessed, peaceful Thanksgiving to both of you. Thank you, audience, for tuning in, watching the show, listening on the iHeartRadio, caregiversolutions.info, Tuesday at 6:04 p.m. until 7 o'clock Thank you all. It's been a horrible year, but we're making the most of it. So we'll be back with another show next week. In the meantime, have a blessed, safe Thanksgiving. Good night, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teal. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week.